As most of you will know, a couple of years ago, Richard Brown and myself set up RCI Developments. The primary goal of the company was to motivate web browser development on RCI. We didn't talk about it a great deal initially because what we didn't want to do was talk a big game and then not deliver anything. It's nothing worse than standing up, talking about how we're going to do a really good web browser and then you don't hear anything for 2 years. And we've been down that route with RCI too many times. Last year we decided that we were going to say something primarily to motivate programmers, but also because we started to see some developments and fruitions in our other work, and we felt that it was time to talk more clearly. During that first year of work, one of the opportunities that came up was the opportunity to buy Castle technology and with it RCI, the operating system. And that's obviously a deal that was too good to pass up. So the big news last summer was RCI Development's acquisition of Castle and with it RCI. And I think a few people were a little bit, ooh, what's going on, when we announced that. But as we revealed last October, the big motivator for that was to make RCI truly open source, because that opens up so many doors worldwide for what is possible with RCI as a truly open source operating system. In the past, Castle always charged a fee for the use of each and every copy of RCI. So if you wanted to put RCI on a device, you could be paying up to £10 plus VAT, I think, per copy that you installed on a shipping device. You could get that down to sort of £1, £2, £3. But the bottom line is, if you wanted to ship 1 million boxes with RCI, you're going to have to pay Castle Technology multiple millions of pounds. Now, you can probably imagine that if you're trying to convince anybody serious about using RCI, that kind of financial commitment to an operating system when things like Linux and Android and so on are all free, it's an uphill struggle. That essentially the only people who would ever buy into that kind of business model are people like RComp or somebody who is developing a machine for RCI. You know, where if RCI is your big title feature of the machine, then you don't mind paying a few quid to have RCI on it. If, on the other hand, you're trying to build a box to, I don't know, any consumer electronics box you might care to imagine, you don't want to be paying large amounts of money to an operating system company that, frankly, nobody is ever going to see or care about. The choice of operating system doesn't directly make these companies money. Therefore, they just want an operating system that is cheap, effective, and as open as possible. So this opportunity to acquire RCI was a direct result of all of the work that had been going on previously. If you look back in time, right back to when we started doing the original RMini, each successive iteration of RMini, RMini X, RMX6, and so on, has built and expanded the infrastructure in terms of companies and people who were involved in buying the licenses from Castle. That it started off with just Rich and myself doing working together to do the original RMini. By the time we got to the RMX6, we'd incorporated a number of other companies into a consortium. So we had people as far away as Holland, Germany, several people in the UK, all working together to make the RMX6. And because of this, when it came to actually buying licenses from Castle, I believe we were buying far more than anybody else put together, because the machines were going all over the place and doing all sorts of things. And of course that meant that when it came to sell Castle, the people who were buying the licenses were the people that Castle wanted to be passed on to, as it were. So we were able to achieve the acquisition of Castle without impacting the money that had been put into the browser development. So we were able to get both new investment and additional investment from ourselves. So basically what we were able to do was have both the web browser development going on and the acquisition of RCI without one polluting the other. And I think that was brilliant, because there are some people who would naturally say, well, I invested to get the web browser, why are you going off and spending it on RCI? Indeed, I remember one person specifically came up to me long before we'd even thought about acquiring Castle, and they said, just promise me one thing, you're not just going to go and buy RCI. So apologies to that guy, we did, but we promised we didn't use your money to do so. And by opening the source of RISC-OS, it's made a whole bunch of things possible that were impossible previously. I mean, when I get to the RComp talk, I'll be showing you the laptop. This would have been completely impossible to do if we hadn't open sourced RISC-OS. It exists entirely because people in the Far East got wind of RISC-OS as going open source. They want open source operating systems on their hardware. They want an open source operating system that isn't Linux. They've got Linux. They've got 30 flavors of Linux. It's sort of Heinz 57 varieties. But they're all Linux. And what they were wanting was something that was not Linux. And so you've got people in the Far East chasing the RISC-OS scene to get RISC-OS onto their hardware, providing development units. We're able to be in constant daily communication with the people who actually build the hardware. Plus or minus 12 hours. And that kind of a relationship is only possible thanks to the fact that RISC-OS is now fully open source. And with that, it makes life easier for all the RISC-OS companies to continue to develop their products, removes the onus of having to pay licenses from a lot of things, and just generally makes everybody's life an awful lot easier. In fact, the only people who don't benefit probably are the four of us who have actually invested our money in getting RISC-OS. But then even myself, with being able to sell the laptop, really everybody wins. So, yeah, open sourcing RISC-OS. You can see, obviously I've held up the laptop. I'll be talking more about that in a bit. We also have here one of the industrial units that again, is made possible by open source RISC-OS. These, you can see, this is designed to fit in a 1U rack. You have power supply in this end. There's a solid state disk in there. You can see the network HDMI and various other connectors around. And these are used in a number of industrial and server projects around the world, all facilitated by open source RISC-OS. We will actually be making these cases available to people if they want to do their own projects in that kind of a environment within the ordinary RISC-OS scene later in the year. But all of this is made possible by what has gone before, the fact that you guys have supported us through Harmony X, ARMX6 and so on, is what has made open source, laptop, industrial, everything, all the other things, a viable prospect and something that we can actually do and bring forward and what have you. Indeed, as a bit of fun, we've done for RISC-OS developments today some low-cost mugs for people to buy just as a low-cost fundraiser. Just as if you don't want to be an investor, but you just want to give us a big thumbs up, grab a mug. And you can see on one side we've got enabling the future, which is essentially what RISC-OS development is all about. And then on the other is a message that I think you'll all want to get behind. We wish this message had gone around a long time ago in the RISC-OS community. Keep calm and enjoy RISC-OS. So those are available on the RISC-OS development stand. Richard's covering both the Orpheus and RISC-OS dev stand because I tend to be rather busy at these events. So I do the talk, he's doing the selling. As far as web browser development is concerned, which is probably the most exciting bit, we actually have two web browsers being developed. One is called OWB, or Origin Web Browser, and the other is called Iris. Now, to avoid any confusion, somebody has pointed out that there is was another web browser about 10 years ago in the Android or mobile phone space called Iris. This is nothing to do with the Iris that we're developing. Just so happens that it's the name of a song that the programmer likes, so it's called Iris. Also something to do with viewing and eyes and iris, and yeah, you get the idea. I'll start with OWB. Essentially, the differences between the two projects and why we're continuing to support two projects rather than just putting everything behind one is A, that we're not putting all of our eggs in one basket, but B, and perhaps more importantly, what we're finding is that with web browser development, you can do one of two things. You can deliver a fast, functional browser, or you can deliver an all-singing, all-dancing browser. You can't necessarily do both, at least not without massive manpower. So what we have is OWB Origin Web Browser is a smaller, faster browser, and Iris is a full-featured port of the absolute very latest WebKit browser that powers some of the world's most well-known web browsers. If you use a Mac, you're using WebKit. Chrome used to use WebKit. They have actually changed onto something called Blink now, but and WebKit can also be found in Microsoft's browsers and so on. So it's somewhat, if you're doing a web browser, WebKit is pretty much your first port of call. It's what you want. Origin Web Browser actually uses an older version of WebKit, so there's lots of WebKit in what we're doing. The reason being is that since WebKit powers browsers that have been used for quite some considerable time, the web understands WebKit and vice versa. So if you're going to use an engine, you kind of want to use an engine that is compatible with the rest of the world, and WebKit is the engine that the rest of the world tends to use. Origin Web Browser, as I say, you'll see, is quick, a little bit older, but gets the job done rather nicely. You can see 1, 2, 3 seconds, not tested in the screen mode. That's annoying. I'm just going to shove it up to 1080p, which is what I was running when I actually tested it. This is my own fault because I did some new templates for it 2 days ago, and I obviously haven't tested it in the higher resolution screen modes. Oh, sorry, in the lower resolution screen modes. So please forgive that faux pas. Okay, that's better. I don't have an internet connection here in this room, so apologies for that. I'm just going to load some local files. You can see that we've basically taken some of the old browse graphics, updated them. Reason being is because RISCOS Development's owned RISCOS, and part of RISCOS was the old browse web browser. We decided why not use the user interface elements that people know and love. Browse always had a very positive, people have fond memories of Acorn's browser. So why not build on that for our new web browser? If I drop in an example HTML file, I don't have any super examples to show you, so it's going to be a bit awkward. Oops, sorry. Let me just pop into that. Make sure it's seen the fonts. And then try that again. There we are. At the last show in February, I was talking about how we could have beautiful fonts or we could have faster speed. Since then, we've been able to combine those two things together. So we've got the faster speeds of the ugly fonts with the pretty fonts. The way we've been able to do that is to introduce an actual font rendering engine as well as the actual font technology. We now have another layer that is a text object manager, which provides additional font caching and text caching. The RISCOS font manager obviously does things like that anyway, but what we're doing here is we wanted to maintain compatibility with the rest of the web, which means we need to be able to use things like TrueType fonts for web fonts. So in order to do that, you need to use something that understands those, and that's why we're using our own font rendering technology in this browser rather than the standard RISCOS font manager. It opens up a lot more options in terms of being able to render websites correctly. You can see that if I sort of scroll this down, scrolling speed is reasonable, etc. We have things like text selection going, so I can highlight a block of text, press key on the keyboard, and if we drop into edit, we can paste that straight into edit. So what we're trying to do is get lots of RISC-OS niceties into there, as well as the WebKit engine. You can see that it loaded quickly. There was no sort of none of the sort of if you've tried things like Otter browser, you know that you can have quite a reasonable web browser, but it's glacially slow. You saw that OWB. If I just close it and just reopen that, so you can just sort of time it on a stopwatch. 1, 2, it's more or less as fast as something like NetSurf. JavaScript-wise, you've got a JavaScript engine in OWB. It isn't at the moment optimized for speed, so whilst you do get interactive things, if you go to Google, for example, and you start typing to search for something, you get a drop-down menu with all the suggestions and things popping up, as you would expect in other web browsers. So all of that works. In terms of layout, you've got sort of complicated cascading style sheet pages working quite happily. But being that bit older, this engine for OWB isn't quite state-of-the-art in that respect. But it's sort of trade-off of state-of-the-art versus performance. There is an updated engine for OWB available, which we are investigating, but we decided to concentrate on trying to get some of the user interface elements working properly, and trying to actually get something that was solid, reliable, and worked based on the current code, rather than always trying to keep moving and never actually releasing anything complete. We can zoom in and out, you can see. And although it may not be obvious without an internet connection, the URL bar works. We can type in sort of WROCC. So it's not going to go and do anything because there isn't an internet connection to go and do anything, but it does work. We can click on the home button, which will take us to the RISC-OS Open website, for example, and so on and so forth. So that's OWB, and then we shall see if I can run them both in the same session. This is always fun. Where are we? Prog dev. If I need reporter, a Unix font FC, and that, and then it's still in development. We haven't actually released anything yet because there's no point releasing something if we know there's a sort of series of bugs and things that we need to get sorted. We'll just be irritating everybody with a. No, I mean the first things it will first go out to investors in RISC-OS developments. The reason being is that those are the guys who put, in some case, thousands of pounds into the company. They deserve to get early access to the software. We are, of course, still looking for more investment. So if anybody has been holding back because they thought, well, let's see what RISC-OS developments can actually do, I'd like to say multiple web browsers, owning the operating system, giving it away to everybody. I hope we've done enough to earn a little bit of kudos so far. And so we would, if anybody would like to sort of invest 500 or 1,000, it's always appreciated, because at the end of the day, we're doing this for love. And I'll be honest, being brutally honest, I don't take any money out of RISC-OS developments, but it takes probably about a third of the hours of my day, which means I'm not doing RComp. And bearing in mind, RComp is a RISC-OS company. It doesn't earn a megabucks anyway. It's sort of having the investment in RISC-OS development so that we aren't dipping into our own funds for that is, a huge boon in terms of being able to do things. So we've got Iris on the icon bar there. Iris has a few little features like the bookmark window, so we can do bookmarks and things. Again, I probably won't be able to show a massive amount of this, but at the last show I couldn't show anything. It does now run on my machine, so that's good. Things that you're seeing here. Now, first and foremost, the very fact it's running at all is something of a miracle. Iris, where OWB is fairly traditional in terms of its compiled with standard GCC tools, and the there's nothing particularly outstanding about how it's put together other than the fact that it's a major project. Iris is a colossal thing. Iris uses the very, very latest WebKit, as in sort of, I think this build is a sort of March, April this year WebKit. So we're absolutely cutting edge to the minute, and they're designed so that it can track WebKit. There's some side effects of this which I'll come on to in a moment, but bottom line is very thing. Now, WebKit is huge. I mean, it's probably, if you take like a big application for RISC-OS, like Impression or something, source code for WebKit is probably like 1,000 times bigger than the source code to Impression or something like that, just to give you orders of magnitude. It's huge. It's actually too big to actually run through any of the standard compiler tools. They just crash. They will not compile the code. So in order to produce Iris, Lee has actually had to produce a whole new compiler set of tools based on the very latest GCC 8 suite, rather than traditionally a lot of RISC-OS stuff is done through GCC 4 point something or other. So it's absolute latest tools. They don't output code in the same format as the rest of RISC-OS code, so he's actually had to develop a new way of running code and supporting the actual executables that come out of a modern version of GCC. So when we first announced RISC-OS developments, I actually talked about how there were multiple pillars that we wanted to do. So web browser, we wanted to do the supporting development and development tools and supporting the operating system. You can see that with Iris, we've got the web browser, we've got the development tools, and with the whole thing, we're bolstering RISC-OS as a whole. So in many ways, Iris sums up all of what RISC-OS development is trying to do. Even the actual running of the application is clever stuff that you'll actually see if we look at the task manager. WebKit was designed for multi-threaded, multi-core processors. RISC-OS is single-threaded, RISC-OS runs on a single core of the processor. Now, I'm not about to suddenly say we've done multi-core work to make this possible, although that is happening in the background. What we've implemented with Iris is a system of processes which talk to each other dynamically. So you've got Iris, which you can see. Do I dare try the pointer? I may blind people. Apologies if I do. So you can see up here, you've got the main Iris slot. That's the main actual application. It's the user interface elements. It's the back window. Emphasize that it is not this white window. When we were actually trying to get the thing running, I would often see a grey window, which is Iris, but I would not see the white window, which is WebKit. This framework, which is if you like the RISC-OS framework, talks to the WebKit process, which is this white window here. It talks to a network process, and then it spawns additional processes as it needs to for things like disk access. I forget the various others. There's JavaScript processes. You can see down here, we've actually got several dynamic areas as well for Iris, the network process, memory maps of all the different sections. It's, if you like, a new way of developing RISC-OS software. It's a major thing, and that's why I had problems getting it to show at the last show, but as you can see, it now runs. You can also see here, I don't know how much of this will actually work in without an internet connection, but we can see there's a little plus sign here. Oh, yep, good. So Iris actually implements tabbed browsing that you'll be familiar with from pretty much any other web browser. So you can see the tabs there, and this does all work. Each spawns when active spawns a new WebKit process. We can type in a URL, and it will then go away and fetch it and display it. And we have some screenshots of sort of live sites. I don't have, without the internet connection, I can't show you much. It is pretty slow, to be honest with you, in part because some of the reader only seems to kick in when I move my pointer in and out the window. So when I'm testing it, I'm doing this. I have mentioned that to the program as being not optimal, and certainly not something that we could ship to a customer. Yeah. So that's the framework for Iris. If we actually look in, let's see. Apologies, got to find my way around my own hard drive. Iris. We can actually look at some of the, these are now a couple of months old, but you can see sort of common sites. You can see the tab with the site details. It's come up with the illustrations. You can see the scroll bar and so on. That's probably not the most exciting of screenshots. Basically, these are just examples of common websites that you might actually want to visit. Again, you can see the tab browsing, you can see eBay, you can see the titles. It just looks like eBay as it would on any other device, really. And at the risk of being an anticlimax, that's ultimately what we're looking for on RCI, is the ability to access websites like normal. So again, you can see the various things coming up. And often these sites won't display things even remotely properly unless you've got working JavaScript and all the cascading style sheets and so on. And that's why it's so important to have modern WebKit. The problem, though, that we're finding, which is I need to have a little discussion with Jeffrey Lee at some point, is that the very latest WebKits are starting to drop support for ARM v7 and only want to do ARM v7 with thumb extensions. So that's going to be the next challenge, is seeing whether we can enable thumb extensions on RCI. So there's always something to challenge us. Either that, or we'll have to take over the ARM v7. The main thing was trying to find that the WebKit people didn't have anybody to maintain it. So maybe that the RCI community has to step up to do that. We shall see. We've done that. We've done Argos. Not in the screenshots, I'm afraid. Let's see. That's Reddit. Nothing particular. That's the final one. Again, you can see the tabs going there. I think the problem is, if you'd like to see more of these, come to the stand and I'll take you through them properly. You saw in one of the scroll bar on one of the previous screenshots. So yeah, you do. It will scroll. Again, I mean, the main issue with Iris at the moment, I would say, is one of performance, and so we're going to need to do some optimizing and what have you in order to get that going at a decent rate of knots. But the bottom line is, you have. I mean, both browsers give a JavaScript engine. Iris gives you the state-of-the-art browser, but more slowly. OWB is much more agile, a little bit older, but still a big step up from something like NetSurf. Obviously, NetSurf will remain the fastest of the browsers simply because with web browsers, the more you do, the slower you go. It tends to be the trade-off. Just by the sheer amount of code you have to execute. That if you look at the sort of code for NetSurf, you're talking about an executable of maybe 3 or 4 megabytes. If you look at the code for OWB, you're probably talking about sort of 70, 80, 90 megabytes. And if you look at something like Iris, you're probably looking at sort of several hundred megabytes. So, I mean, that code has to go somewhere through the processor. And, the more code you execute, I'm afraid the slower things get. So you obviously look to optimize, look to improve performance. One of the things that we've introduced on the ARMX6 recently, for example, is the graphics accelerator, hardware graphics acceleration. And that obviously means that sort of Windows and things move around much more smoothly. In terms of the web browser work, exposing the graphics processors in modern hardware means that you can then take that graphics processing that exists in most modern ARM processors and then use that to accelerate the web browser. So at the moment, that's not something that is currently active, but that's one of the areas we're looking at to actually try and boost performance and make things better. So yeah, I think that's more or less a wrap on RCI developments. Web browsers, open source RCI, loads of projects. Great stuff. Hope you can feel like you're supporting either a mug or a donation or just a chat on the stand. Right, RComp. When I haven't been doing all that, I've been doing RComp. Let's start at the beginning. NetFetch 5.5. Primary release in this last quarter has been NetFetch 5.5. That uses the latest Acorn SSL technology to allow you to do email with the very latest encryption standards, right up to date. I think it's sort of, again, dated March, and end of March, SSL technology current to end of March 2019. So for once, RISC OS is literally bang up to date. As far as I know, there aren't any more recent updates for the SSL technology than is present in RISC OS now. So that basically gives RISC OS compatibility with essentially all modern email services, including some RISC OS, supposedly RISC OS friendly places that have started using the latest SSL encryptions, or latest TLS encryptions, more to be specific. So the importance of encryption and things like that on email can't be stressed enough when basically, pretty much every internet provider is going that way going forward. So, RISC OS is now ready for that, NetFetch is ready for that, and so on. It also introduced a quick fetch feature, which makes it very quick and easy to fetch individual mailboxes. You can just go on, click on menu over the icon bar icon and pick the mailbox you want. Even inactive mailboxes can be fetched that way, which is really useful if you've got a set of mailboxes that you use regularly, like your main email address and maybe one or two others, and then you've got some that may be provided by organisations or clubs or work or something that you don't normally want to fetch, but occasionally you do. You can mark them as inactive in NetFetch. They won't normally be fetched, but then you can use the quick fetch menu. You just go menu, click, 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 and boom, you can be fetching those email addresses up, so on demand, very, very quickly and easily. The software is also faster, smoother as usual. We've resolved an issue that caused one guy to say that he, when he was listening to his music, he would sometimes get pauses in the music when fetching SSL connections. Now he can listen to his music to his heart's content, so all good. So yeah, NetFetch 5.5. We only called it 5.5 because we felt it was kind of only a year and a half after the last version, so we didn't feel it was time to call it version 6. But to all intents and purposes, it's version 6, and that's available now. It costs £15 for the upgrade, or at the show we've got the CD version, which is normally 20 quid. It's £17.50 at the show, so you can save yourself a couple of quid by getting the show CD version. We also introduced a new version of Fireworks, Fireworks Pro 2.22. That includes a new mode called Statement Mode. I will see if I can demonstrate Statement Mode. Essentially, as the name implies, it was originally designed for viewing bank statements, but it's one of those features that we think can be quite useful to anybody who's working with sets of numbers and things. So if we go to Show Demos, and then Fireworks Pro, I'll drop the resolution back down. So hopefully people can see things a bit more clearly. We're running at 1280.1024. Change. Cross fingers, toes. You can. I was not expecting that eyeglass, and I did a quick accept. Bingo. Right. It was a bit scary for a moment there. Let's go to RComp. All being well, I have the latest version on here. Does that say 2.22? Good. Yes, all is good. So basically, statement mode, which can be applied to new spreadsheets, or if you're loading existing data in, you can even apply it to Excel documents that people send you to make them easier to read. You'll see that we have statements, various statement and split statements. If I just read an ordinary statement, again, you can see that what it does is to introduce headings across the top and also oscillate the cell colors automatically between white and grey. And that means that when you load figures into it, you can immediately track across the page with the oscillating colours. That, you know, if you're on a white line, you can follow that across grey line and so on. If you dump a CSV file, like from your bank, if you do online banking, most of them allow you to download a CSV file of your bank accounts. Just drop those in, and boom, you'll have your columns down and going across. There's also a landscape version. Where we can go across the page, or we also have the split mode, which uses demonstrates the latest versions column view splitting facilities. One of the problems with older versions of Fireworks was that although they would allow you to split the view, you could never actually go down as small as one cell because it was always determined by the size of a icon. You know, you see these scroll bars and buttons and things. It would never go below sort of 2 or 3 of those, which meant you always had sort of 3 or 4 rows visible, which was rather awkward for headings. You can see here in this mode, I can scroll down my document and we can keep the headings intact. And we can actually make that as small as we like. So if we wanted to just have a really small, tiny bit, we can go as small as we like or as big as we like. But so that makes it, if you've got a lot of numbers, it means you can retain the headings at the top of the document at all times and immediately see what's what as you scroll down sort of 30 or 40 pages of numbers and what have you. So we hope that statement mode makes life easier for people working with Fireworks and numbers. We also, in the new version, have better integration between the word processor and the database, which makes doing things like address labels or mail merges for letters and things much easier. One of the nice features in Fireworks with the database and word processor integration is that if you've got one of the problems with addresses, generally speaking, is that the length of people's addresses varies. So some people address will be sort of 22 Smith Street, London. Next person's address will be sort of flat 1, 3 Smith Street, Toxteth, borough of something or other, London, South England, the UK, the Earth, etc. And then you'll have your postcode stuck on the end and what have you. And if you try and actually use that as a for mail merge, in a lot of programs, you'll have gaps there for the empty lines. So you'll end up with sort of, 10 Smith Street, London, gap, East 20, whatever. In Fireworks, you can tell it to auto-skip any blank entries, and it will actually sort of compact or expand the mail merge accordingly, so that you end up with just the right things, and you can still keep your things like your postcode separate, so that you can search the database for that. So that makes sort of doing labels and address, that kind of stuff with Fireworks extremely powerful. And makes a lot more sense of the Pro version with the database, the spreadsheet, the word processor, all in one package. Fireworks Pro 2.22 remains at the affordable price of £39. The upgrade to the new version on CD is a £10 new CD upgrade. We decided to keep it as low as possible, so it's not a mega bucks raising thing, but So that's Fireworks. We also have a new version, which I'm not going to demonstrate now, of the genealogy software. The genealogy records portion now supports DNA analysis. So if you're into family history, I'm just going to break for a second. Serena, I can return that to the risk cost development stand, and if Richard wants his tea, he can have his mug back. So the genealogy software now supports the results of DNA analysis, which is the current buzzword in genealogy circles. DNA analysis tends to tie into online websites, which the genealogy records will allow you to pull information off websites into its own databases for analysis. And you can download the data straight off the DNA testing sites, pull it in, and put it straight into the database. Now, DNA testing can result in large amounts of data. The engine has no problem with dealing with that, but because each section of the database is of the genealogy database is kept separately, but then cross-referenced with the other sections, it's very easy to handle that and still cross-reference the important data between possible matches in your births, marriages, deaths, etc., with the data that you're importing from the web with the DNA information. For those unfamiliar, the genealogy record software is different from the main family tree software. There's the two portions. I mean, they fit together, but there's the two portions to them. This is part of the genealogy record software, which is basically designed to assist with the sort of the donkey work of genealogy, as opposed to the sort of pretty bit of making family trees. That when people are doing genealogy, there's a lot of legwork, a lot of going to records offices, looking at gravestones, getting information, and then trying to fit that information together to actually figure out who is who, how do they actually fit into the family tree. Do they actually fit into the family tree, or is this a red herring? And that's what the record software is all about, collating all of that information that comes in, cross-referencing it, figuring out who is connected to who. And of course, with the DNA, you can load all of that in, you can ignore large chunks of it, but it will allow you to prove the different parts of those connections. If you're unsure on a connection, a DNA test can provide additional information that will allow you to verify your hypothesis that there is a connection there, or it may prove once and for all that no, Bob Smith is not linked to Jane Smith, despite what you might think. So that's the headline feature in the genealogy records. There are a number of smaller improvements throughout the software to make it easier to use and easier to link everything together. It will be a free upgrade. It will be on Plink Store. We haven't actually got the latest version on the CD-ROMs as of now because we did find a bug at the last minute, but that will be going live for free download for existing customers and anybody who buys the CD at the show. And that will be available early next week, I hope. That's that. What am I forgetting? Let's talk computers, and I'll see if I can remember anything more about software in a minute. Because I know there were 4 or 5 different things on the press release that I put out. Machines. Well, I mean, obviously the headline bit of interest is probably going to be this little guy, the native ARM laptop. Usually when I hold up a laptop, it's running Windows and has RISC-OS under emulation. This guy doesn't. He has an ARM processor. He runs RISC-OS natively. For the first time since 1992, do we think? Something like that for the A4. So, what's that? It's only taken 25, 26, 27 years. So, yeah. Native RISC-OS on a laptop. Mostly ready. We are awaiting a production batch in early May. We did actually get the suppliers in the Far East sent us an email saying, would we like to have one in time for the show? So I said, sure, if you can get us anything in time for the show, that's good. So nominally we have sold the first consumer ARM RISC-OS laptop at Wakefield. In practice, the one they sent us, they twiddled something. This is a common thing. They twiddled with something in the production process on the screen, and so we can see RISC-OS running on it. The lights come on. You can press Control-Shift-F12 to shut it down. It's all works, but you can't see a damn thing on the screen. So it's on its in practical terms, it's on its way down to the lead developer to get that sorted. To be fair, we've seen this once before, so it's not likely to be a problem. But just one of those moments when you've been waiting for it to come in time for the show, and it's all arrives and it's all you're all excited, and you open it up, and you turn it on, and go, drat. So, yeah. In terms of neat stuff, since the last time I pulled it out, if you came to the Southwest show, we now have both USB ports working, which is pretty cool because it means you can have, like, say, a network connection in one and USB stick or, I don't know, printer or mouse or whatever you fancy in the other USB port. So having 2 USB ports, big bonus. I've also been doing some work on the sort of user interfacey elements. So you'll see that we now have here brightness control, and if I increase the brightness up, you can see the brightness goes up and down accordingly. Essentially to give you some idea of battery life, this has been on since sort of 9 o'clock this morning when we turned it on for the first time. I haven't, I haven't turned it off or put it to sleep or anything since then. It's now about 12 o'clock, and we've still got 73% of the battery to go. So there's a fair chance it might even do the whole day. You see that. The other thing that we've added, particularly for the smaller unit, which runs at the full 1080p resolution, is you can see that the brightness controls are done on a right click on the display manager. We've also got big mode, and big mode is probably less useful on the lower resolution laptop, but at 1080p it allows you to basically see everything bigger. If your eyesight's not quite so good and you're going with the smaller unit's going to be the most commonly available one, in all honesty, it means that it makes 1080p on the slightly smaller laptop much more practical. And so, when I showed it to Alan, he said, "Oh, I'd use that all the time." So, we think you'll like big mode, and you can turn it on and turn it off at the click of a button on the thing. So, slightly anticlimactic, but ROCC OS on a laptop for the first time in 27 years. We also finally have minims. Sorry, price? You haven't mentioned the price. Oh, yeah. Well, we asked, you'll like this, we asked people whether we came up with 2 prices, $399 or $499. So everybody thought, oh, they're going to try and charge us $499. No, we're going to try and sell you it at the $399 price. So, now, I will say there's a caveat here. As people will know if you've received the newsletters and things, what we've asked for going up to this point is deposit of 150 quid on these. The 399 price will be for the people who paid the deposit. So if you'll have one at 399, suggest you pay the deposit. The actual production price of the production machines will be something like 425, something like that, because we are subsidising the 399 models very slightly as a thank you to the guys who put the deposits down. This is largely due to unexpected costs, namely duty and things like this that we hadn't. Whenever we import one of these units, the duty on it's about 40 quid. So although the headline prices on the units are not hugely expensive, and trying to reclaim some of this as you're supposed to be able to has proved, let's just say HMRC are not our favourite people. It is probably more to do with the shipping agents rather than HMRC, in all honesty. But we will be including things like a USB network adapter with every unit, no extra cost, because we think that's convenient and it will allow you to connect to the internet until we have the Wi-Fi and stuff happening. There will be a further charge for Wi-Fi as and when we get that going. But what we decided to do was charge the lower price and then work quietly on the Wi-Fi with the money that we've taken from the basic units. And as and when we get that, we can then headline announce that. So I'm not promising Wi-Fi guaranteed. That's why you're getting the USB Ethernet adapter in the box. But obviously that's, there's no point doing this if we don't try and do Wi-Fi. And then we figure if we charge that separately, then in no way are we actually promising you something and then failing to deliver. We're delivering you a product. You've got the product. You've got it at a cracking price, I hope. And then when we've got something else, you'll have the option to get that. And if you don't want to pay the extra, fine. You've got a working laptop. You can use it with USB, not a problem. And if you want the Wi-Fi, you've got that too. So, it seems the fair way of doing it to everybody concerned. Nobody gets screwed, pardon the expression. It just seems straight and honest, and that's what... Because I was agonising over this, do you pre-sell something that you've not got work? No, that's not right. So by splitting it like this, it's fair to everybody, I think. We also finally have the minims in stock, again imported from, this time, Israel. We were out of stock for a long time on the minims because basically we were buying up all the UK stock to the point where literally nobody in the UK had any stock of these things. We were just running around trying to find anybody who had a minim to try and actually sell the thing. And as I say, we got to a point where nobody in the UK had stock, we just literally could not get any. So in the end, we managed to import a batch, and even those are pretty much sold out. So I'm going to be putting in another order on Monday. So minims are literally, you can't keep them in stock. Not surprising, really. You've got an entire RISC-OS computer that's as fast as this thing, does as much as this thing, in something that you can juggle. I mean, you power it via a USB lead, for goodness sake. They have USB plugs in Starbucks. I mean, you can have a RISC-OS computer that you can just put in your pocket, pull it out, stick it in a Starbucks. I mean, it's quite amazing, really. And, I know you can get Raspberry Pis and things that are cheaper, but, I mean, even Raspberry Pis aren't that small, and this is nicely packaged, and, it's a proper computer. You can have a couple of 100 gigabytes of storage in there if you want. Gigabit Ethernet, HDMI with graphics acceleration, 4K graphics, eSATA for connecting a solid-state disk, because you'd be hard-pressed to fit a solid-state disk in that size, 2 USB ports, away you go. I mean, you can understand why they fly off the shelves. Minims. In February, we launched the Titan, which is a reduced cost version of the Time Machine. Essentially, what we've done is the Time Machine uses a very expensive chassis. I mean, it looks beautiful, but not everybody wants to spend, an extra £100 on a fancy chassis. And a lot of people are using Ionixes or even Panther Ionixes, which are whopping things. So basically, the Titan is a tower format titanium system with all the sort of Time Machine software backup, etc., that we do, but just for a reduced cost. And at this show, we've actually got some cool stuff in the Time. Well, I say we've got some cool stuff in the Time Machine. Someone's gone and bought the damn thing already. Pardon my French. So actually, we can't even demonstrate that because somebody's already wandered off with it. But there we are. We've now got additional front USB ports working and card reader all at the same time, so you can actually have 3 front USB ports and a card reader plus the rear USB ports, CD drive and everything, all going at the same time on the Time Machine, but for the lower cost. So it's all pretty cool. And of course, RMX6 with graphics acceleration, new version out at the show, free update for existing people. I don't know, if you haven't already seen the graphics acceleration, come to the stand, I'll demonstrate it. Basically, it makes RMX6 graphics up to 5 times faster, and basically makes it really smooth even at high resolution. So, RMX6, affordable machine, super speed, similarly minim, got titanium with more functionality. It's a great time to be in RISC-OS, really. Can't say much more than that. So I'll stop there, because I think probably there's people waiting for the next talk. So I'll shut up. Goodbye. Do I have time for a question? Maybe 2 questions. And if anybody's got any questions at the back. Not at the moment. There is a OWB does have in its later engine build. There is a sort of plugin-y type thing that allows you to farm the video out to and sort of effectively do YouTube. So I have seen OWB doing YouTube, has been demonstrated to me. So it's not beyond the realms of possibility, but it's not there yet. Anybody else with a question?
Is the Wi-Fi hardware already inside?
Yes. Correct. Yes. I've never tried. In theory. Again, that's probably a case of writing the drivers for it. We haven't done so. What I didn't say about the laptops, which is quite fun, is that they do have 2 separate storages in them. And the one set of storage has Linux on it. So you can actually run both RISC-OS and Linux on the same machine at the same time, more or less. Well, not literally at the same time, but, if you are stuck in a hotel room with one of these and you need to access a website and you don't yet have a RISC-OS Developments web browser, you can run Firefox on it and what have you as well. You know, it's not just a RISC-OS laptop. It's, you know, there are a few more bells and whistles as well. Which again, I mean, you may never use that, but it's a fun additional bonus item, which may get you out of a jam at certain points.
Okay.
And the Wi-Fi does work on the Linux bit, so...
I think we've run out of time now, Andrew.
Okay.
I think you've covered everything anyway.
More or less.
I'd like to give Andrew a big thank you.